narrative has completely changed. The Federal Reserve is not going to be cutting interest rates this year. And that's exactly what our guest is saying. And he said it all along. Whereas we had so many other people that would come to buy, hold, sell, and all the other financial channels. And they said we were going to have 5, maybe even 6 rate cuts. Not going to happen. And we're going to explain why. Welcome, everyone, to Buy, Hold, Sell. I am your trader, Todd Schoenberger, and I am joined by my friend and co-host and host of the new Money Mavericks program, Tobin Smith, out in sunny and hot Scottsdale, Arizona. Toby?
Yeah, that's why I have a vest on, you moron.
I figured the air conditioner was on.
Oh, that is true. That is true. I don't know how somebody changed those numbers, man. And all of a sudden I'm going, dude, it's 90 degrees outside, and I'm freezing by what's off here. So
there you go.
Carry on.
Very nice. Well, listen, our featured guest today is Jake Novak. Jake is a political and economics correspondent. He is also a 30-year television veteran, spending time at CNBC and Fox Business, as well as CNN. Jake, welcome to Buy, Hold, Sell.
I'm happy to be here, and somebody get Toby some sunscreen, because honestly, you got the vest on, but I'm worried about you. I'm worried about you and that sun down there.
It's hypertension. It has nothing to do with sun. Trust me. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Well, Jake, he actually lives on a golf course as well. I mean, you think he'll be able to get some sunshine, but who knows? But Jake,
I know. Jake only knows me when I've been made up. Okay, I didn't do makeup today. Okay,
it's true.
Let it go.
There you go. So, Jake, you have been saying all along, and we've been talking a while about this, but you have said no interest rate cuts this year. Can you explain to the audience why you thought this all along?
Well, a little bit was because of my understanding of Jerome Powell's personality and who he is. You can love him or hate him and the policies and all that kind of stuff, but he is actually not someone who withers to political pressure. And with inflation as it was, and the situation being what it was, the only reason why somebody like the Fed or somebody like Powell would have cut rates this year would have been because it was an election year, because of political pressure. And I was thinking, you got the wrong guy. This isn't Janet Yellen. This is Janet Yellen, who is completely, by the way, throwing out the laws of economics when she speaks because of political pressure. It's so sad to see, because she's done that many times. Jay Powell will never do that. Doesn't mean he's a better human being overall. In that case, he is. So that was my first reason. I was thinking, Powell's not going to do this unless we see some really solid numbers, and we never saw it. And it would just be insane, because even if the numbers did get a little tamer on inflation, you would have had to have seen it for longer than just a few months for them to start totally reversing course and cutting rates. This was a Pied Piper rally based on this promise of these rate cuts. Doesn't mean there weren't other reasons for the markets to go up. There were some good earnings. We did have companies like Nvidia. I understand that. But the people who were really banking on this rally because they were expecting these rate cuts, and the foreign markets that were expecting it too, I don't know what they were drinking. I don't know what they were thinking, but they certainly missed a big opportunity, because if they had done a little bit of a personality profiler type sketch of Jay Powell, they would have known all along this wasn't going to happen. This guy will not yield to political pressure, no matter what other things you don't like about him. He's pretty good about that. And that's why I thought, no way, Jose.
Jake, you're one of the first people who've ever sort of built out that sentence, because I know Jay back from the late 80s. And, he was a salesman for private equity. He wasn't an analyst. He wasn't an economist. He was, they called the suit guy. He would put a suit on. They'd go to, a nice place in New York, and he'd close deals. You're so right about that. Let me give you another side of this, Todd, that in essence, we created this idea that somehow if we raised rates from 0% to 5%, that in and of itself, in a consumer-led economy that's completely different than the last time we did that, services being 78 to 79% of our economy, and 42% of households actually getting some form of monthly income, either pension, blah, blah, blah. If you go through the numbers and you look at it, my point all along was that you're not going to get enough inflation down, because the inflation that's in there is being stoked by the raise of the rates. People have been looking at, to me, all wrong. When you rose rates to 5%, that put about $50 billion a month into the U.S. economy on bondholders. Now, maybe if you're a report or something, you don't own any bonds, or you're not retired or whatever, you don't see it. But that $50 billion has been a real show. But then the other big one that Jake knows more about than anybody is that, when you double the deficit spending for 10 years in a row, and now we have a $28 trillion deficit. We used to have a $12 trillion overall deficit. You got to pay 5% on all that money. And that and the stimulus in there has more money chasing less goods, which is the definition of inflation. And it's more demand than supply because of all this huge. Oh, by the way, home valuations, equity was about 8 trillion. It's now 28 trillion over the last 10 years.
Wow.
And oh, by the way, whether it sounds politically correct or not,
yeah,
the top 50% of households by income in the United States own 98% of the wealth and the equity wealth in the United States. That's a fact. Look it up. And so all this spending, all this spending that is fixed, and then there's spending which I spend because I need a new vest. In other words, things that I can don't have to buy, but I want to buy.
Right.
That comes from the top 50% too. And so right now, the strength of the top 50% of the households really, with just from an economic standpoint, means the bottom 50% will struggle along and pay their bills and bitch and moan, but their discretionary spending has gone down. But it didn't matter because 98% of the wealth and discretionary spending, 78% is from the top 25%, has gone up. And that is why we do not kill inflation.
Yeah. So, Jake, Jerome Powell has been adamant about this 2% target, and it doesn't appear that we're going to be hitting it anytime soon. As a matter of fact, he has come out publicly and he stated that until we really see us into a trend where we will see 2% inflation, that's when they will actually start considering a cut in interest rates. Will we see 2% inflation? Forget about this year. What about next year? Do you see it happening for this economy?
Absolutely not. I don't see it at all. I said something nice about Jay Powell a second ago. Now let me say something not so nice.
Okay. I like
Here's
that.
the deal.
There have been a
number of previous Fed chair people who have made a mantra out of saying, there's only so much I can do, guys. If you keep overspending, I can't help you. Greenspan was big on that. Bernanke was big on that. Greenspan more, but I don't hear that from Jerome Powell. And that's one of the things I'm worried about with him. I think he's another one of these Washington bureaucrats who sees himself as a hammer and sees everything as a nail. Yeah. Tobin just kind of really hit the nail. Speaking of hammers and nails, he hit the nail on the head very well there. This is not an inflation situation in this country that can only be solved as much as it used to be by the raising of rates. Actually, the raising of rates is doing some of the harm in this case. We have a supply chain problem that's having a there's a big reason for our inflation problems. The government has a lot of arrows in its quiver to fight this beyond just raising rates. They could do so much in the regulatory area, making it easier to get goods and services from one point to the other, making it easier for things to be produced in this country, making sure that tugboats don't crash into bridges and make sure that the infrastructure is. There's a lot of things that you can do if you're an executive branch that can really help ease inflation in this country. You can do things like make it easy, put more drugs over the counter. I mean, they're talking about prescription drug costs and things like these are the kinds of things that are at the discretion of the federal government, and stop spending like a drunken sailor. We have a growing economy. We now have an economy where if we had just kept the Trump level spending in place, we would now be in a budget surplus because the revenues now are greater than where we were at the spending during the Trump years. So these are all things that the federal government can be doing besides raising rates. And where is Jay Powell to say this? I shouldn't be the one saying this. He should be saying this at every hearing, every time there's a mic in front of his face, just like Greenspan used to do, and say, "Hey, I'm only one guy here. There's got to be someone else to I can only pitch. I need someone to catch. I need someone to. This is LBJ had a heart attack as he was yelling when he was majority leader of the Senate, saying, you guys are making me do all the work, and then he almost died.
Right.
Jerome Powell should almost have a fit every time someone says, well, what about inflation? It's like, I'm raising rates. That's all I can do. Why don't you stop spending? And why don't you do something about helping the supply chain? All that is beyond my pay grade.
Wow. With Toby, I mean, what do you think? You think Jay Powell's going to be listening to Jake anytime soon?
I think first off that Novak is off Jay's freaking Christmas card list. I'll tell you that. but I have been for a long time. Jake's absolutely right. I mean, what we haven't had the discussion about is why do we apply, the hammer that worked in the 70s and 80s and expect it to that economy, which was 78% manufacturing, by the way, which is incredibly interest rate sensitive, by the way, because remember the hammer was if you raise rates high enough. I happen to have started in the bond market in 1980, Jake, and by 1982, every bond that I sold was worth half of what it was in 1980 because rates were raised to 23%. Guess what? That locked up the economy like a mofo, and all of a sudden, people couldn't buy a house, couldn't buy a car, couldn't pay a credit card bill, yada yada yada. Can you imagine the APR on a 23% Fed funds rate on a credit card? It would have to have been 60%, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that worked. And because they quickly took it down and because there was a lot of other cool stuff going on, we recovered. But the fallacy of sort of economics, and I even taught a class on this once, and then I was such a heretic they kicked me out, was that you can't use the model from the 80s in the 90s. You can't use the models of the 201 to 207 they are completely different, number one. And number two, the levers, however you want to pronounce it, of growth are much locked in today that they weren't locked in today. And they're by far the biggest difference is in 1982, when I started, the difference between the highest income and the middle income and the lowest income was about like this. There was a few outliers, television stars and Jake Novak and stuff like that making the big money. But that was sort of the band. Today, the band, I can't make my high, high enough. I live in an area where the average household income is $375,000 a year. If you live in parts where Jake is, it's $600,000, and they're living a middle-class lifestyle.
Yeah.
They're paying a boatload of taxes, and those taxes then, in theory, would have gone, and we would have paid down debt. We would have gone and borrowed more because we have this surplus from the high income. But no, we didn't do that. We cut rates for the high end, and then we borrowed now $27 trillion. It was $12 trillion 10 years ago. Where's that money going to go? I mean, this is sort of modern, monetary theory here, Jake, a little bit. But if you own your own currency, you can print as much as you want.
Yeah.
And you're not going to run out of money. But if you spend it and against borrowing, inflation.
You're right about that. The thing I can never understand, though, going into this year, and we asked Sam Stovall this question, Gina Martin Adams, we cannot understand why there was this feeling that the Fed needed to cut. I mean, you had a strong economy. Usually fundamentals history always tells us that you start cutting rates when there's a downturn in the economy. It just never happened. As a matter of fact, things are continuing to grow. You have plus 250,000 plus jobs being created. I think over the last 3 months, the number's at 270 plus. So you still have a lot of job growth that's happening. Yes, there is a little bit of a peak on the wage growth, but there's really no reason for the Fed to make a move right now, and nobody could ever answer the question for us. I love the fact that Jake is coming out here saying, look, it's not going to happen, and he's giving us reasons why. It's definitely something that's different.
But Todd, look at the demographics, too. In 1982, the average age of an American was something like 48. Today, 10,000 boomers turned 65, and 5,000 boomers turned 70. That's been going on since 2020. It's going to go on until 2032. And I don't know about you, but most of my boomer friends don't work that much because they got money coming in from everywhere else. They don't, they're not. So who's taking their jobs? There's nobody taking jobs. Thank God for AI. Maybe we'll have a chance to do it. But all I'm trying to say is, if you try to fit a model that worked in 1982 onto the 2022 economy, world economy, you forgot totally that the reason why we had disinflation since 2001, 2002 is because we shipped all our manufacturing to China on a relative basis. And all of a sudden, Walmart, these $50 shirts are now, 15. And so people's cost of living based on goods price, essentially disinflation, is why they kept scratching their head at the Fed and saying, how come we're not getting any inflation? And it was clear, but they didn't get. Why is it that my cell phone now that costs $400 cost $1,500 when it first came out, and it had about 2 megs of memory? I have more memory in my this iPhone than I did on my son's server running a website in 1998, right? So we've had disinflation, technological disinflation, and we've gone about as far as we can go on that one. And at the same time, we have the rapid aging, the rapid look at Jake, you know this one. You said this a million times, that basically the United States government is a health insurance company and a pension plan with their own standing army. Because all that stuff is all locked in. We're going to spend $1 trillion on defense this year. We only did $400 billion, 8 years ago. Medicare, Social Security, Medicare Advantage, pension plans, and an army. That's what we can afford. We just added another $12 trillion to build shit, and give $5 trillion to semiconductor, and give $6 billion to Samsung and other chip players, because now we have this new aspect. China's not our friend anymore. We're reshoring, we're not offshoring. Well, that makes things more expensive. And then to Jake's point, oh yeah, by the way, those supply chains have not healed themselves. They fly stuff now. We're along one of the aircraft part companies because they're crushing it.
Right. Yeah.
But that makes stuff more expensive.
Okay. Listen, let's leave it there on this note, guys, because coming up after the break, we have to ask Jake all about what's the tensions, what's going on in the Middle East right now, what it means for oil. We also want to talk about the election that's coming up in November. How's that going to impact the stock market? So much to get to. And with us today, we do have Jake Novak. He is the political and economics. He's a consultant and correspondent. Plus, he has 30 plus years in television news, which is Toby and I. We love television news. That's why we have BTT, and we have so much to offer you. So we want to thank everybody.
You left off Rockin' Tour.
Yes, that's right. So we want to thank everyone for being with us today, but please stick with us. We have so much more to get to. We'll be right back after the break.
Buy, hold, sell, brought to you by Crosscheck Management.
Ready to up your game and learn more about the thrilling world of sports betting? Introducing Double Down with Breslow, the ultimate podcast about the business of sports gambling. Join me, James Breslow, and a long list of expert guests as we dive into the art and science of the sports betting industry. Evolving regulations, technology enhancements, and the meteoric rise in the number of players makes this sector the fastest growing and most intriguing in the world. Unlock the business secrets from many of the industry's most recognizable C-suite executives, including famous odds makers and influencers. Every episode of Double Down with Breslow is packed with insider tips, deeply skilled analysis, and in-depth discussions. Don't miss out on the ultimate resource for mastering the business of sports betting. Listen to Double Down with Breslow on the Evergreen Podcast Network or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's Double Down with Breslow, the business of sports betting podcast.
Welcome back to Buy, Hold, Sell. Well, with us today, we have Jake Novak. He is a political and economics consultant and correspondent, and also a very seasoned TV veteran. And we're just very happy to have him with us today. And he has so much to offer. As a matter of fact, you're going to get so much more of Jake because he's going to be hosting a show on Biz Talk Today TV called The Analyst. It's a show you're going to hear all about. It's going to be launching in the next couple of weeks. We'll give you more details later on. But right now, we have to continue the conversation that Toby left us with in the last block about healthcare. I mean, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this, Jake. Tell the audience what you think that really could be structured with the United States government and healthcare.
Well, I'll start with the secret story about my history with Tobin. We were at, he was a frequent guy on Fox Business back when I helped launch the network. And at the time when we were launching the network, the whole Obamacare thing was starting. And I remember, and if you can believe, I lost this argument at Fox, of all places. I lost this argument. I urged the newsroom. I said every single day, stop calling it health care reform. There's no change in health care. This is health insurance reform. And they were like, no, we're not going to do that. Boy, were they wrong not to listen to me. We were talking about the things that the government can do to make either inflation worse or better. And I can't think of one thing where the government can really make an impact that would be positive more than in healthcare. Any discussion about the price of anything that isn't based on our 5th grade lesson of supply and demand, that's how prices are set, is not worth having. We have a supply problem in this country in healthcare that is almost completely caused by the government. Doesn't matter if you're talking about Republicans, Democrats, technocrats. We choke off the supply. We don't have enough doctors in this country. We make it really hard to become one. I don't want it to be easy. I don't want quacks. But we make it too hard to become a doctor. We make it too hard and expensive to stay being a doctor. The hospital industry has consolidated into monopolies even more than the banks and the telecoms in this country. It's outrageous. And boy, what could go wrong? The one thing that could keep me alive or dead is monopolizing. That doesn't sound like a good thing to me. The government needs to do an AT&T style breakup of these hospitals. And I can go into a long story as to why they've allowed it. It's politics, it's money, it's influence. You probably know where I would go with it. But we need to make it easier to become a doctor in this country. We need to stop a lot of the regulations that make no sense when it comes to healthcare. We need to stop paying the hospitals that have bought private practices that charge the government, Medicare and Medicaid, the hospital rate, even though all they did was just take ownership of a private practice. It's not a hospital. We allow them to get away with this. This would save us so many billions of dollars and lower the inflation rate. If you have healthcare, if you're lucky enough to have healthcare, if you have private healthcare, you've been paying more since Obamacare was passed. If you have it through your employer, they've been taking out more of your check. That's inflationary, guys. Just because it's going for a good cause for your heart or your prostate doesn't mean it isn't inflationary, okay? It's inflationary.
Hey, you're making me quackers. You're making me quackers here. Look at
hopefully your prostate is still inflating, but we don't want the economy to be inflating so much, in a bad way. So honestly, that is, to me, is a big deal. And it's been something I've been writing about for years. It's something I still talk about all the time. When people complain about the cost of healthcare and they don't have any knowledge of the fact of why the supply has been choked off, thus jacking up the price, then to me, it goes, obviously this goes well beyond our inflation discussion. This is life and death. And instead of going to the Fed every time, why doesn't the government look at the things that are costing it a lot of money? Like Toby says, we're basically like a healthcare company that has an army. Well, why don't you cut your costs without cutting quality? And we don't do that. And we don't do that because of politics and bad reasons.
This is not a 24-hour telethon, but it could be just on this subject. But I'd offer a couple things. My twin brother was a senior executive in HMOs for years, and then finally said, wait a minute, this is sort of strange. We negotiate these prices, fixed prices with the doctors and providers, so on and so forth, and then we get our payment and we put a seal on it. Now we make a profit, right? But the mathematics of healthcare are completely nonlinear. 1% of cases in the United States consume 40%, 40, of our healthcare, entire freaking healthcare bill. And that 1% person, sorry, obese people, has every health issue that stems from being unhealthy weight, be unhealthy blood pressure, unhealthy everything. And then also the poverty they live in, or the semi-poverty, feeds onto that. Additionally, it's a downward negative health feedback loop that we do nothing to control.
I wrote about this for years. I wrote about this for years, and I even had a solution. There's a solution, and I got killed for it. When I was writing for CNBC, I wrote, we need to quarantine that 1% financially, not literally. Financially quarantine that 1%. There was a way to do it. First of all, set aside some billions. The Wall Street Journal estimated that $100 billion, which sounds like chump change now, could have been put aside for that sickest 1%. Then you get a bunch of young doctors who are looking to research and find new healthcare treatments and drugs and things like that, and tell them that their research will be subsidized if you work on these people and give them their regular treatment as well. I have entire solutions for this, and all I got back in email was, "Oh, you want to quarantine these people in some kind of leper colony?" No, I said financially quarantine them, you morons.
Right.
But the argument was lost on those people. But I even had a solution to that. Again, nobody listens to good solutions because they want to yell at each other.
Well, also, I mean, but even going back to getting managed care in, managed care does make sense if you're spread over large populations and you're able to manage the care. Number one. Number two, to your point, Jake, I went and got my annual physical this week, and my favorite doctor, Luz Zabatini from Ecuador, worked his way up to University of Texas. He's spent about $8,000 on his education. He's got 2 medical licenses, 2 MDs. He was sitting there like doing basic tests. He wasn't. The nurse should be doing that. Sabatini shouldn't be doing that. When they get all the data in, I'm on a system where it takes my blood pressure and all sorts of health things all the time because I want to know. I mean, I want to manage my own care. Number one, don't even get me started on that one. Yeah. But Jake is so right that we have $250,000 a year doctors doing what $90,000 a year nurses should do, but we should pay the nurses $125,000 because they do 90% of the physical work. Now, I'm not talking about a surgical center. I'm not talking about obstetrician, et cetera, specialty, but I'm just talking about general health care. We structured it so that the doctors have all the power. The nurses have very little power, and yet the nurses do so much of the work. And why, by the way, why are 42% of nurses in the United States either from the Philippines, from Mexico, from from Ecuador? We don't have enough people in the United States who want to be nurses. We have almost now over 300 million people. You know how many nurses and doctors you need per thing? You need a lot more nurses per million people than you do doctors. But we've reversed it. We have more doctors than we have nurses. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, I see that, and you're right, and I do agree on the monopoly argument as well, Jake, on as far as where the hospitals are and how much they can control. And but as well as I do, the optics of breaking up something like that would it just wouldn't go over very well, especially from the political side. But let's switch off of this. I do want to talk a little bit about potentially of higher oil prices. Over the weekend we had the drone war. The drones were launching the missiles from Iran to Israel, and thank goodness 99% were intercepted. But where do we go from here? Because oil right now, where it's hovering, is actually, I think you brought this up, where it's lower than where it was, I think, on October 6th. But what do you think for the price of oil, especially as tensions continue to rise and we go into the summer months?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going up on the price of oil. When I heard about the attack launching, I called all my loved ones and told them, go fill up your car. I expected the prices to get jacked up at the gas stations on Monday. The oil price actually has gone down since then, but not at the gas station. The gas station, we're up another couple of cents national average. But there will be an Israeli retaliation. I think they're doing a little bit of a head fake right now. I don't know if you mentioned, I mean, I also spent some time as the media director at the Israeli consulate, so I do have some good contacts. And I think Israel's doing a little bit of a head fake over these last few days. Happy to see Iran more worried about its homeland and thus leaving their proxies a little bit more vulnerable. So Israel's taken out some top Hezbollah operatives in the last couple of days, and that's a very positive development. But eventually there will be an attack on the Iranian homeland. Now, I don't think they're going to go after oil refineries. I don't think they're going to go after, they definitely won't go after civilian areas. But I think they will go after their military and their nuclear infrastructure as much as they can. They won't be able to knock them both out. That's out. That's not going to happen. But there will be things that will happen. There will be probably some kind of cyber or EMP attack on the nuclear sites. I think that the gas stations in Iran, the refineries won't be hurt, but I think the gas stations may stop working on next Tuesday, something like that. Look for that to happen. And there also might, by the way, this is one of my favorite non-collateral damage, don't kill anybody other than maybe one person attack that you can do on a country. You know that missile silos and missile sites, if they get even a little bit of water in them, they don't work for another 100 years. So we might see a little flood in some of these little, I would send in a bunch of F-35s to escort one of those forest fire planes and just drop that water all over, that flame retardant all over their nuclear sites. Ain't nothing going to get launched out of those sites for another 100 years. Stuff like that.
Todd, we have the Novak solution.
Yeah.
F-15 and fire.
Yeah, I mean, they would need a good escort because they fly like crap, but something like that. But so and then oil prices will go up even if they don't hit the refineries. We were at something like $93 a barrel on October 6th. When people were saying, well, Israel's going to drag us in, I kept saying like the price is down, which was telling us what we knew happened on Saturday. Everyone was like, wow, the Saudis and the Jordanians shot down some of those drones. Well, the Saudis were the reason why oil prices didn't spike after October 7th, because they made it clear they're not playing. The Saudis and the Sunni states in the Middle East are sick of the Iranians. They're sick of the Palestinians. They can't say so publicly all the time. Sometimes they do, but they are sick of them. They know that they've never really been serious about peace. They're so tired of it. And that's the end of that. And if this were 30, 40 years ago, it would be a different story. But this is a lot to do with the Trump, Abraham Accords. Give him all the credit in the world for that. Although this was something that was in the works well before, it's not all Trump. It's not all Jared Kushner. But still, if Iran gets hit and there's a little saber rattling, we could see $90, $95 barrel oil pretty quickly. That's going to hit us during the summer. We could see $4. So I'm just like, be ready. If you have some gas cans, fill them up. Fill up your car if your prices are still decent at your corner gas station, because they are going to go up. I don't think it'll be disaster, but they are going to go up.
Well, I'm with you, Jake. I would add though that again, different paradigm. Almost all of Iran's oil goes to China. It goes nowhere else. It's already pre-sold to China. So if you bomb a tanker going to China, China takes that as an attack on China. So I don't think any of the experts I work with don't think so. Secondarily, obviously, the United States is now the largest exporter of oil. We're larger than Saudi. We're larger than, no, we're not larger than all of OPEC. We're certainly larger than Saudi Arabia. So we have, spare capacity. The drilling in the Panhandle and in the Permian and our big rich areas has gone down because the price was, remember, $72 30 days ago. It's a commodity. It's a world commodity. And again, no one's going to wipe out Iran's oil, because then China has to start buying from someplace else, and we're very tight on reserves that way. And oh, by the way, let's also say that we used to have 480 million barrels of oil underground in the United States, and now we have 40. In our reserves. So we know we can't mess with anybody, because we used to have either the 240 or the 480, depending on the year, of reserves that would last us 45 days, and we have our own production. Now we don't. So the United States is Brent oil, is WTI oil. The rest of the world is Brent, and it's the rest of the world that maybe has more at risk. The United States, I wouldn't worry your pretty little heads about oil, gasoline prices going to $5, unless you live in California, where it's $5.45 right now.
Well, Jake, I'm just curious of one thing, and just say, you're on the political side, really just interested in knowing your thoughts on the fact that the humanitarian crisis we keep hearing about in Gaza. And I mean, nobody really talks about how awful October 6th really was. I mean, that it was a sneak attack, call it what you want. I mean, it was absolutely horrendous what happened to those people, the children, the babies. I mean, it's awful. But then the narrative really shifted, and it was almost like this anti-Israeli movement where we looked at what was happening in Gaza. What are your thoughts right now with that? I mean, do you think the Israelis should just keeping their foot on the gas and continue to attack and looking for Hamas in those tunnels?
Well, Todd, there's been a very sick experiment that's been going on. This is actually, it didn't start on October 7th. Israel has been fighting this war for 76 years.
Right.
And it's been able to win it. In most of those years, it keeps getting stopped from winning the war with the justification being, well, this will be the merciful thing to do. It's literally slowly pulling off the Band-Aid off of a sore for 76 years. And we're seeing that scenario play out again. The Israelis could have taken out Hamas by now weeks ago, but the United States put the brakes on them because they needed to say, oh, we're being merciful here. They're not being merciful to anyone. They're dragging out the misery. It's a disgrace that this has been going on for so long. Now, there's another caveat to all of this, which is that if Israel knocks Hamas out, this is the time now for some of those other countries I was mentioning, for the Saudis, for the Emiratis to come in and help rebuild and also administer Gaza. They're not always the greatest people in the world, don't get me wrong, especially the Saudis, but they're infinitely better than Iran, infinitely better than Jordan. You know, I have a whole deal planned out. I would ask the Saudis and the Emiratis to come in, help rebuild and re-administer Gaza. And in return, not only do they get the prestige, but if I were the government of Israel, would give them control over the holy sites on the Temple Mount, which now belong to Jordan. You know, Israel's had political and military control,
Right.
but for the sake of peace, has allowed the Jordanians to control. You know, the Saudis, the most important thing in the world to them is that they control the two mosques, the holiest two mosques in all of Islam. They'd love number 3, which is Al-Aqsa on the Temple Mount. I'd give it to them in the heartbeat, because the Jordanians, for all the money and protection that the Israelis have given them on the Temple Mount, keep spreading blood libels like Arabs aren't allowed to pray there. It's the other way around. If you're a Jew and go try to pray on the Temple Mount, God help you. You're going to get arrested by the Israelis really quickly. It's the other way around in the hopes of peace. A lot of good that's done Israel for being nice in that way. So those are some of the things going on. And the last thing I just say is we paid for this. This is insane. We have turned over to the Iranians hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars since the Iran deal in 2015. The Biden and Obama foreign policy teams are the same guys. They've been trying to dance at 2 weddings. That's an old Yiddish phrase, which means like you're an idiot if you try to do that. So they're giving money to Iran, which they know is going to be used for weapons. Then they give money to Israel to help them develop their weapons. And it's like basically putting a tiger in someone's hotel room and then saying, don't worry, we'll send up a lion to take care of it later. Why don't you just not send the tiger to the hotel room, you moron? It's so stupid. And I'm so tired of people saying, oh, I don't want to send American troops and put sailors on the ground. Well, neither do I. No one, that should never happen. If you don't want that to happen, how come you didn't say anything when the hundreds of billions of dollars were going over to a country that's been making war on us, that killed 700 American soldiers in the Gulf War? You didn't have a problem with that, but now you're worried? Now you're upset because they actually, you know, we might actually have to put them down? It's the most ass-backward policy, makes no sense. And this is, you know, this is where we are. It does come back to money. And by the way, when you transfer hundreds of billions of dollars from point A to point B, don't you think the people who facilitate that transfer get a cut of it? It's not about Michigan and Minnesota. Yeah, that's in the news for a week. It's
Jake,
about the
you're
money.
bursting my bubble, for God's sakes.
We have paid moles and assets for Iran in our State Department, in our White House, just as much as we have them in our news media. I know some of them. I won't name names because I don't have the photographic evidence. When I do, I will. But we know that this is what's going on. We have traitors in the White House, traitors in the State Department who work for Iran, and you'd have to be blind not to see it or not understand how money works.
Yeah.
Wow.
Toby, this is why everybody's going to tune into the analysts. Jake Novak.
I'm tuning in. For once in my life, Todd, I'm speechless. The only thing I see is the helicopter with the $100 million of cash flying, into Iran, and some of us saying, well, we don't give money to Iran. I said, all right, go on the Google, ask about flying $100 million cash in $50 bills.
Yes.
And say that, that we're not complicit and we're total babes in the woods here and we're getting taken advantage of. Yeah, I got nothing, but I will say this. I'd say 99% of Americans have not visited the Middle East. And certainly in my travels in the Middle East, I came to the conclusion that I will never speak Arabic. I don't understand Islam. Yiddish is, at least I could get it. Shalom, lalata. It's such a different culture from everything the average American has ever. If you get elected to Congress and you're from Skokie, Illinois, God bless Skokie, Illinois, you're probably Jewish, But by the way, it's 25% Arab now, right? We brought a lot of those families into the United States, and we've tried to be the good guy. But Jake makes a great point. You can't be the great guy to everybody. It's physically, literally impossible. And then spiritually and structurally and culture-wise, it's insane to ask someone, hey, Jake, go over there and fix that, Iranian thing for me, would you? Right. We have thrown so much money, so much blood, so much treasure into this, and to me, I don't have any answer whatsoever other than the fact that we have the biggest fucking Navy out there, and we better make that Navy bigger because we're going to need it.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I have to agree. And I got to say, what a spirited topic that is. Let's conclude the show on one last thought. The election coming up in November, Jake. What do you think? Right now, you have Donald Trump with all of his legal problems. The man is in court right now on a multiple felony charges, and yet he still leads in the polls.
It's trumped up. It's trumped up, Todd. It's trumped up evidence. He's as innocent as a baby child. Well, you deep state people who attack an honest man who maybe has had 42 bankruptcies, but they weren't his fault.
There you go. I want Jake's
hookers in his room in Vegas.
I know your opinion.
But it wasn't his fault. Sorry.
Well, Jake, I would say this. We had Jay Hatfield on, and Jay is a Wall Street superstar, and he did say that if there's a Democratic win in the Senate, the House, and the White House, that will derail the market and actually send stocks much lower. I think he gave a negative 20% sell-off in the markets. So where do you stand, though? Do you think that the markets, we just want a mixed bag here, or do you think we really need a Donald Trump presidency as well as a Republican takeover of the House and maybe even the Senate?
No, I think the markets definitely want a mixed situation. And the fact that the House is now teetering on the edge of going back over to the Democrats is one of the reasons. Well, not the main reason, but one of the reasons why we've had a sell-off the last few days. It's definitely not what the market wants. But the way I see it with this election right now, if Biden is breathing, he's probably going to win. Now, the fact that he may not be breathing is pretty, the odds are high he may not be breathing. So let's not forget that. It's not a given.
Cut that into an ad for our show.
Yeah, that's a promo.
He may not
Novak
be.
Guarantees that Joe Biden will be dead by that will get some ratings.
The issue here is the infrastructure. It's an infrastructure election, just like it was in 2020. And I want everyone to understand that more important than the polls. First of all, it's counterintuitive. Statewide polls are less reliable than national polls. I can explain it to you quickly in that people are moving from state to state a lot more than they used to. So whereas the national numbers don't change if I move from New York to Florida, the state numbers are going to change, and that's harder for the pollsters to keep up with. I don't blame them. It's difficult.
Absolutely.
So I'm not trusting these statewide, but let's say they're true. Let's talk about some of these swing states. The Republican Party in Michigan is literally bankrupt. They don't have any money. I read the Detroit News every day online. Great newspaper, by the way. They don't have any money. And you know how many lawsuits that they're going to need to file and strategies they're going to need to come up with to beat the ballot harvesting and the other shenanigans? There's only 2 states that do mail-in votes and ballot harvesting fairly. One's a red state, or become a red state, and one's a blue state, Florida and Oregon. Everybody else mucks it up, and it's got nothing. I'm not claiming fraud. No. Don't say I'm a fraudster. I'm just saying they're not secret ballots. And if you don't have a secret ballot in an election, it's not a legitimate election. I learned that in 5th grade along with supply and demand. I hope you did too, because I don't know who's seen this ballot. I don't know who pressured a loved one or a friend to vote for it. I don't know who handled it at the post office. It's just not legitimate. But you have major states, including Pennsylvania, that have really wonky mail-in vote. Trump and his team are not prepared for this. They're definitely, yesterday was a great day for Trump, and then he went to that bodega and stopped talking about his trial a little bit, because he's got a great opportunity now with all the attention on him, even more than usual, to actually do some campaigning. He needs to do more of that. But right now, I just think that the infrastructure, the way it is, the Democratic Party is prepared for. The legal system is helping them for the most part. It's not enough of a majority for Trump in these swing states to overcome that. Now, things could change. They could get smarter with this campaign. A few months ago, they came up with the best slogan I've ever heard in campaign history: too big to rig. Because not only is it short, it rhymes, and it's a constant call. Never rest on your laurels. You know, if I were a basketball coach, I'd be like, oh, great. I wish my team would always be going for the jugular. Ever since I said that, they haven't repeated it again. You know, no one listens to me. They should be saying that over and over again, and just saying everyone's got to work harder. We got to get our early voters. We've got to find out how to either fight the ballot harvesting or match it. And they're not doing that. So I just don't think that the Trump's going to win the White House right now. Again, it could change, but at this point right now, I don't think they have the infrastructure to win, and that's going to carry over to the Senate. That's going to carry over to the House. And I agree, the markets will absolutely tank a good couple of percentage points again, probably per week, once they start to realize this. Again, things could change, but I just don't see it.
Hey, Jake, quick question. I don't know anything about politics because I hate politics, but you know, the abortion issue, I read the data on is very important in states like Pennsylvania and other big electoral college. What's your take?
It's going to hurt them in a couple of states. It'll hurt them in Arizona. Now, I mean, there's going to be a lot more Democrats willing to come out to vote because of that almost total ban, which Trump was really smart to oppose. And Trump had a very good response and he was helped when the more radical Republicans were angry at him for being a little bit more open about abortion. They turned him into a middle ground guy overnight on abortion, and that was really great for him. And by the way, anytime people are talking about Trump and an actual issue in a campaign, it's a win for him. When they're not talking about him personally, not talking about rumors, not talking about innuendo, and not talking about these court cases, which are real, that's a win for him because people mostly like his policies. And you can't get conspiracy theory about the policies as much as you can about, oh, I heard him say this, and I heard him say that he doesn't like any soldiers. You know, it's the dumbest stuff. I hate when people do that. So that's good for him. But in some of these states, it's going to be really, really bad. You know, I hear from a lot of Jewish voters, and they're like, well, Jewish women are still more concerned about abortion than even the anti-Semitism in Israel. And to that, I say, if you're so worried about abortion, then the way that you're voting, Hamas will come here and give you an abortion for free, because that's what they did on October 7th. So if that's the way you're voting, you know, I think it's stupid to vote that way, but I'm not dumb enough to think that that won't be a big motivator for a lot of Democrats to look past the economy, look past the foreign policy failures, look past the fact that the president is not, you know, compos mentis. I've known Joe Biden for 45 years. He ain't half the guy he was even 10 years ago. There's no denying that. But people will look past all this because abortion has kind of become a sacrament to a lot of Americans for a number of different reasons. It's about paternalism. There's a lot of reasons for it. I understand it. Even as a man, I understand it. I get it. But it's a big one. It's a big one. And the Republicans so far, for the most part, with the exception of those right-wingers making Trump look good, are fumbling on that too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hey, Toby, Carrie Lake in your backyard there seems to be switching, where she's becoming more of a moderate on this subject. And
we don't do politics much on the show. It was intriguing though. I mean, I've known Carrie Lake for 12, 14 years. I've personally never seen a person that I know completely transmogrify into a person. There's nothing like her anymore. Whoever Carrie Lake was turned into this thing, and this sort of the MAGA robot, which is scary to me, even if I was a huge MAGA fan. I mean, you're electing somebody like to be the governor of Arizona or the mayor of, Phoenix. Don't spout out like 4-sentence tribal concepts and say that's a policy.
Yeah.
And then don't follow the rat hole of all the votes, all that voting, or all the votes weren't counted, so on and so forth. I have proof. I have 25 different. Everyone she's brought in has either gone to jail or been thrown out because they were just making shit up.
Yeah.
And when it comes to voting, I'm totally with you, Jake. This is too important to mess around with, silly idolatry and crazy conspiracy and all that stuff. But
I remember something you said about me on social media years ago. It was after I'd left Fox, and I remember this. You said, because this is reminding me of what you're saying right now. You said you knew all these people at Fox Business, but the only person who actually understood ideology and really believed in what he was pushing and was able to create a show based on real knowledge of it and not what a talking point he got from Roger Ailes or from someone else, was Jake Novak. And
true.
That's the problem with the Carrie Lakes and other people of the world. I like Donald Trump's policies, almost all of them, with the exception of the deficit spending and I didn't love some of the criminal justice stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm a unique person. First of all, I was yeshiva educated. And if you study the ancient Jewish texts, they thought all the kings were bad kings, except for the good ones who were also no damn good. There's a very anti-politician, anti-dictator, anti-personality running the show type of message in that. And I was brought up with that. It's like reading Mad Magazine and becoming a cynic. You study the Talmud enough and you look at anyone who runs for office and you're like, no, I don't like you personally.
He's a putz.
Right. So you got guys like, so there are some really smart people who understand the Trump policies. Mike Pompeo, for example. Some people, there are people like that, but there's not enough of them. And so when you're just blindly following something, you don't really understand it yourself. And this is really true of the Democratic Party more often, but we've seen it a little bit more close up with the Trump stuff. People don't know what they're talking about. They can't defend it. And this is true. I mean, I know so many Trump supporters who don't even know that Trump doubled the standard deduction for blue collar America, which was a huge reason for the economic expansion during his presidency. They don't even know that. I know it because I was asking him to do it before he did it. They don't know that. They don't understand some of the Middle Eastern policies. They're starting to find out now and retroactively. Oh, he was tougher on the sanctions. Oh, he moved they get it now, but they didn't understand it then. And when you have people like that, that's dangerous because they're not going to be able to go off script. They're going to make a lot of mistakes in that way, and they don't understand exactly where things are coming from. And that was that's been a problem in television news. I've been in TV news for 30 years. I can count on one hand the number of true believer liberals and true believer conservatives I worked with. Most of them had no interest in the news. As soon as the show was over, they were back to talking about Real Housewives. They had no interest in it, and that's why they're so bad at it. That's why the regime, and that's why there's no need to have real journalists. That poor guy who just had to leave NPR. If you're running a regime news media station or just a right-wing news station, what do I need someone who can think for? Now, that guy who resigned was truly a liberal, but he was also a real journalist. Why should I pay his salary when all he needs to do is read this talking point? There's no point. I mean, he was going to get pushed out anyway. And that's true of people who think for themselves. So it's pathetic.
Yeah, and I just finally, I wrote the Foxocracy book because I was trying to understand what was so attractive to have somebody tell you something you already believe. Tell me something I didn't know before I got into the show. Isn't that what we were supposed to do? And no, it's I call it the dopamine economics. That when somebody takes their political identity and they merge it, there's actually called identity fusion with their own self identity. Then I know I can I'm not going to tell you the news. I'm going to tell you something that you believe, and I, as a person of reputation and on television, when I say it, you say, "See, Mabel, I told you, I told you." Boom! As soon as you get that, you get the shot, and right in the back of the head. Even just saying those words, I get the shot back in the head. A little amygdala thing there in the back, shoot some dopamine into your brain, and then you don't care about the quote unquote the factual Walter Cronkite news. Here's what happened today. You just care of what turns you on. The reason why you keep turning in is to be validated on the opinions that you've come to essentially be part of your self-identity. And if I disagree with you, I'm going after your self-identity. I can't understand why you would denigrate me so by saying that taxes should be, less than they are, but whatever, your hot point is. We could never do that. Jake knows better than anybody. In 1987, we used to have a thing called what's the act? What was the act that Reagan knocked down? Fudge.
You're talking about Glass-Steagall.
No. It came back for World War II. All these guys saw television movies in Germany, and they said
plan.
No. I'm sorry, I'm having a brain fart. But it was said you can't lie. On Sunday, you have to have 4 hours of political news. There's no advertising. And it was the equivalence that if we have a senator arguing for taxes, you have to have a senator arguing against taxes. and it was the Equivalence Act, but that's not the right word.
Yeah.
And that got taken away in 1997. Roger Ailes got Reagan, who was losing his marbles, to get rid of that, and that's how Fox News started.
Yeah.
That's how Rush Limbaugh started. That's how political entertainment, described as news, got started. And it's like a cancer. It's just grown from a little thing on the back of your neck to your giant forehead. So
yeah. No,
that's all I have.
And I was mistaken. Glass-Steagall was 1934, so I was.
Yeah, I was going to say
that one wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. Freedom of Information Act or some, I forget what it was.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah.
But it changed television, and that's how Rupert Murdoch started Fox, because he bought the NFL rights in '92, and he wanted to attract a more working class audience so he could get them to watch the football game, and that's why he got Roger to come over from CNBC and start the Fox News channel. That's a whole nother episode.
It is an amazing story, and it's the reason why Foxocracy is a great book. We definitely encourage the audience to pick up a copy today, because you definitely will get a lot out of that.
Going into a second printing, because after printing 200, they sold out really quick.
Very good, very good. So yeah, well, I got to say, guys, we're going to leave it there on this show, because unless Fox is going to create a real a show about the real talking heads of Fox News back in the day, we're gonna have to shut it down there. But this is definitely Emmy worthy, that's for sure. But we want to thank Jake Novak for joining us today. You will be hearing all about Jake in the coming weeks with BTT, with his new show, The Analyst. You definitely will want to check it out. I know we're going to get a lot of comments from this show, and that's definitely one you're going to want to tune in. But Jake, we'd love to have you back on Buy, Hold, Sell before your show debuts.
Oh yeah, I'd love it, and people just need to see. You mentioned the NFL. I've always wanted to analyze elections and campaigns like an NFL analyst looks at tape, looks at the film, and just dispassionately gives it thumbs up or thumbs down. There's so much good and so much bad that campaigns on both sides are doing, and it needs to be called out, and credit needs to be given. Both of those things.
Absolutely. Well, I know we can't.
Sounds like a TV show to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, on behalf of Tobin Smith and Jake Novak, I am Todd Schoenberger. We want to thank everybody for joining us today on Buy, Hold, Sell. And coming up on our next show, we have James Bianco is going to be returning to Buy, Hold, Sell, and he has a whole lot to say about the inflation argument and where the Fed should go. So, but we'll have more about that later. So, thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.
Buy, Hold, Sell, brought to you by Crosscheck Management.
If you like Buy, Hold, Sell Live, be sure to smash the like button.